Imagine this. I walk into a room with just $2, $2 small, and in that moment, everything in the room changes, because I decide those $2 are not the end of the story. They're the bold beginning of an empire. And not because it was funny, but because in their minds, $2 couldn't possibly lead anywhere worth going. In their view, $2 was a joke, a trivial inconvenience in the pocket of a man foolish enough to think it mattered. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't comprehend, was that I never saw $2. I saw leverage. I saw a seed. I saw the first brick of a building they couldn't imagine standing in. Because when you're raised in the trenches, you learn something early: not to measure your worth by what's in your wallet, but by what's in your will. $2 was never the point. The point was the mindset. The moment I held that money in my hand, I made a decision. This won't be spent, it will be invested. Not just in products or platforms. No, in me. You see, poor people spend money, broke people count it. But wealthy people, they allocate capital. Even when the capital is small, even when the environment screams impossible. The wealthy mindset whispers, there's always a way. I didn't wait for a breakthrough. I became it. The first thing I bought wasn't a product. It was positioning. I took $2 and bought entry not into a room, but into a conversation. The kind of conversation that shifts perceptions, opens doors, and stretches your name into spaces your feet haven't yet walked into. Because influence is always more expensive than income, and I was willing to pay that price. They told me to start small. I said, no, I will start loud. I didn't have capital, but I had clarity. I didn't have funding, but I had fire. And that was enough. I turned that $2 into a flyer, that flyer into a meeting, that meeting into a pitch, that pitch into a payment, and that payment into a process. The systems followed the hustle, and the hustle followed belief. But let me be honest, it wasn't romantic. There were nights I slept with one eye open and both fists clenched, not from fear, but from fight. I had to protect the vision, because vision is fragile when you're still proving it to yourself. People will look at your beginnings and assume they've seen the end, but they don't know what's working behind your eyes, what's grinding in your gut, and that's okay. It's not their job to believe. It's yours. I wasn't just thinking about money. I was thinking about scale. Thinking in millions doesn't mean fantasizing about mansions and Bentleys. It means asking, how do I solve a problem so powerfully, so consistently, that the world lines up to pay me for it? That's when the shift happened, from $2 to 20, from 20 to 200, from 200 to a retainer, from a retainer to a business, from a business to an identity. Every leap was built on principles, not luck. I was learning to think like a strategist, not a survivor. Survivors hope. Strategists calculate. Survivors react. Strategists prepare. And in a world that celebrates overnight success, I was mastering deliberate progress. Now here's the irony. That same $2 moment that they mocked. It's now the metaphor that I live by. Because you don't need massive resources to move, you need conviction. You don't need applause to start, you need audacity. And you don't need permission to grow, you need to give yourself a mandate. Today, when I walk into rooms worth millions, I carry that same fire. Because the distance between $2 and $2 million isn't measured in time, it's measured in transformation. Not of money, of mindset. So what do you have in your hand? Maybe it's not $2, maybe it's a broken idea, a half-baked plan, a quiet dream. Good, that's where it starts. Start right there. Stop waiting for a better moment. The conditions won't change, you must, and when you do, when you commit, when you flip the switch inside, not outside, the world responds, not immediately, but inevitably. They told me I needed more money. They said, you can't build anything without capital, but I've learned something the hard way. People who wait for perfect conditions never start, and people who start don't wait, because the world doesn't reward the well-prepared, it rewards the relentlessly resourceful. I didn't have funding. I didn't have the backing of powerful uncles. I didn't have a rich godfather slipping me brown envelopes in boardrooms. What I had was pressure, and pressure has a way of doing one of two things: it either breaks you or it builds you. I chose the latter. When you are resourceful, you stop crying about what you lack and start using what you have. You don't focus on the tools in someone else's hand. You sharpen your own. I didn't have the best equipment, so I used borrowed gear. I didn't have a marketing budget, so I became my own campaign. I didn't know people in the industry, so I made people in the industry know me. You see, people love to talk about the grind until it actually grinds them. They want the applause, but not the agony. They want the rewards, but not the repetition. But true resourcefulness isn't flashy, it's not glamorous, it's showing up at 5 a.m. when no one is watching. It's sending the 100th email when the first 99 were ignored. It's calling your own number, pitching yourself, building your own brand brick by brick while people scroll by, doubting you. There's a reason most people quit. Not because they didn't have talent, but because they didn't have tenacity. Resourcefulness is not about access, it's about attitude. It's what you do when the doors are shut, the money's low, and the odds are stacked. It's when you walk into a room where you're not invited and leave with a handshake, a connection, and a deal. I didn't wait for a perfect logo. I started with a name written on paper. I didn't wait for a website. I knocked on doors. I didn't wait for permission. I gave myself the license to move. That's the thing when you're resourceful. You don't wait for someone to shine a light on you. You become the light. People love to say the system is rigged. Maybe it is, but I've never seen a rigged system stop a man who refuses to stay still. A man who understands that if he can't go through the door, he'll climb through the window. And if the window is shut, he'll dig under the wall. And if the wall is too thick, he'll build a new house. That's how I've lived. That's how I've built. Not with a silver spoon in my mouth, but with grit in my teeth. I mastered the art of making a way when there was no way, of finding value in places others had discarded, of creating momentum from moments that looked meaningless. When I had nothing, I leveraged time. When I had no audience, I built one through consistency. When I didn't have a network, I created value so potent that the network came to me. And when I finally got a seat at the table, I didn't just eat. I redesigned the menu. This is what people don't understand. Success doesn't come to the most talented. It comes to the most relentless. Talent might get you noticed, but it's resourcefulness that keeps you in the room. That's the difference between those who peak and those who persist. So here's the truth. Life will never give you the perfect scenario. Your idea will never be ready enough. The timing will never be flawless. But if you are hungry enough, bold enough, and unshakable in your resolve, you will find a way. Not because the way was given to you, but because you built it, and that is the most dangerous kind of person, the one who doesn't need the stars to align, because they've already caught fire on the inside. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants the spotlight. Everybody wants the outcome. But very few are willing to live in the process, because the process is not pretty. The process is not public. The process is painful, and that's why most people lose not because they weren't capable of greatness, but because they couldn't stay committed when no one was clapping. You see, I've learned that the world rewards consistency more than intensity. Everyone can be intense for a day. Everyone can post one flashy video, one viral reel, one look-at-me moment, but consistency. Discipline, that's rare. That's what separates the ones who talk from the ones who transform. And the problem with most people is this. They fall in love with the destination, but never respect the road. They visualize the mansion, but resent the bricks. They dream of the stage, but detest the silence it takes to prepare. But if you don't learn to own the process, you will always be chasing what's already running from you. There were times I built things that no one cared about. I spoke in rooms where chairs outnumbered faces. I created content that got no likes, pitched ideas that got no feedback, launched products that failed. But I never stopped. Not because I was addicted to success, but because I was committed to mastery. Mastery isn't sexy. Mastery is repetition. Mastery is reading the same book 3 times, not because you didn't understand it, but because this time you read it from a different level of experience. Mastery is filming 10 takes until the tone is perfect. Mastery is fixing the small hinge because you understand it swings the big door. See, if the outcome is your only focus, you'll quit the moment you don't get applause. You'll give up after the first no. But if you're obsessed with the process, every no becomes feedback, every setback becomes fuel, and every failure becomes foundation. That's the difference. Let me tell you something uncomfortable. The results you want, they're boring. Not the results themselves, but the road that leads there. Because that road is paved with early mornings, late nights, hard conversations, personal sacrifices, and decisions no one sees. And that's the trick. The most important parts of your journey happen off camera. We live in a world obsessed with highlights, but real growth is in the shadows. That's where character is forged. That's where excellence is born. That's where you either become a flash in the pan or the fire that keeps burning. You want the title, then love the training. You want the business, then learn to love rejection. You want the platform, then be willing to build it when no one's looking, no one's listening, and no one's paying. Because if you only show up when you feel like it, you'll never become who you're supposed to be. I had to learn that success is not an event, it's a system. And systems require structure. They require showing up, doing the work, and trusting that compound interest doesn't always announce itself. But it always pays out. People keep asking me, how did you get here? And I tell them I didn't chase here. I chased growth. I chased better. I chased that 1% improvement. I chased the uncomfortable conversations, the ruthless feedback, the painful pivots. I fell in love with becoming the kind of man who doesn't rely on momentum because he's built discipline. And that's what you need to understand. The real win is not what you get, it's who you become. Outcomes come and go, but who you become, that lasts. That's legacy. That's influence. That's leadership. So stop crying about what hasn't happened. Stop measuring your worth by what you haven't achieved yet. And start owning the process. Be excellent when it's unseen. Be disciplined when it's thankless. Be consistent when it's hard, because if you can commit to that, if you can marry the process with the hunger, the discipline with the desire, the outcomes will chase you. People wait too long. That's the tragedy. They wait for the perfect time, the perfect team, the perfect idea, the perfect capital, the perfect moment where everything aligns like some cosmic blessing. But let me tell you something, the universe doesn't owe you perfect conditions. It rewards momentum. Momentum is messy, it's raw, it's unpolished, but it moves, it builds, it breaks resistance. And while the perfectionists are still sketching their blueprint, the ones who started ugly are already laying bricks. There was a time when I believed I had to have everything figured out. The full strategy, the branding kit, the ideal client avatar, the perfect elevator pitch. I'd sit there, perfecting my slides while opportunities walked past me. Then I realized clarity doesn't come before motion. It comes through motion. You don't wait for the fog to clear. You walk through the fog. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's how you build. You refine as you go, not before you begin. You've got to stop romanticizing readiness. You will never be ready enough. There will always be a gap between what you know and what you need. But motion closes that gap. Motion teaches you what the books can't. It introduces you to the battlefield where real leaders are forged not in theory, but in action. The greatest projects I ever started began in chaos. Not calm chaos. I launched when I didn't have a team. I spoke when I was nervous. I built while I was broke. I sold before the website existed. I didn't wait to get it all together. I got going and figured it out on the road. That's the problem with perfection. It paralyzes. It convinces you that progress must be pretty. But progress has never been polite. Progress is bloody, noisy, awkward. But it moves you forward. And in the real world, forward beats flawless. Some people think the key to success is timing. But no, the key is tempo, rhythm, cadence, movement. Starting small but not staying small. Building daily, learning publicly, adjusting fast. Because success is not for those who waited for conditions. It's for those who created their own conditions by showing up relentlessly. Think about this. When you push a stalled car, the hardest part is getting it to move. But once it's rolling, even slowly, momentum takes over. That's business, that's life, that's personal growth. You push with everything you've got, not because it's easy, but because once you're moving, the game changes. I've seen people with brilliant ideas die with their brilliance because they were too obsessed with getting it right. Let me tell you, the mark, it doesn't care about your perfection. It cares about your value, and you only deliver value when you show up. So start before you're ready. Speak while your voice still trembles. Build with the little you've got. Sell what you know before you have a full package. Launch the prototype. Test the concept. Run the ad. Knock on the door. Make the call. Because once momentum hits, it creates its own gravity. People begin to notice. Resources begin to show up. Opportunities begin to chase you. And suddenly, the same people who once ignored you ask, how did you do it? You did it by moving, and yes, you'll fail. But it's better to fail moving forward than to rot standing still, because every failure teaches, every misstep sharpens, every wrong turn reveals the right direction, and that's the education no classroom can offer. You don't need perfect conditions, you need courage, you need urgency, you need to stop negotiating with your comfort and start demanding more from your discipline. That's the difference between the ones who are watched and the ones who watch. The watched moved. They made noise, they made messes, they made mistakes, but they also made impact. So stop overthinking, stop waiting, stop editing your dream into silence. Start, move, build, fall, learn, adjust, rise again. Because momentum isn't a gift, it's a decision. And once you decide, nothing can stop you. Failure. That word right there. It terrifies the average mind. It paralyzes the weak. But for the driven, for the man or woman building something real, failure is not the end. It is the ignition switch. I failed early, not once, not twice, over and over. Ideas that looked brilliant on paper fell flat in the real world. Clients said no, investors laughed, friends doubted. Some of the people closest to me gave me that look, the one, the polite nod that says, you tried. Maybe do something safer. But I wasn't wired for safety. I was built for war. What they didn't know was this: every failure was fuel. Every no sharpened my pitch. Every empty room trained my voice. Every broken deal toughened my skin. I didn't just bounce back, I came back bigger, faster, harder. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had something to build. The problem today is this obsession with perfection. We treat failure like a stain when it should be a stripe, something earned, something worn with pride. Because let me tell you something real, no empire was built without scars. No legacy was built without lessons. And the deepest lessons are carved into the bones of your biggest losses. But most people quit after failure because they think it's a signal to stop. No, it's a signal to shift. You learn, you adapt, you recalibrate. That pitch didn't land, good. Now you understand what doesn't work. That product flopped, perfect. Now you know what the market doesn't want. That investor rejected you. Beautiful, now you're clearer on your value. There's no such thing as wasted failure, only wasted reflection. I remember a time I lost a deal so big it almost took the breath out of my chest. Months of preparation. Weeks of travel, days of sleepless nights, and in one swift boardroom moment, gone, just like that. I could have folded. I could have blamed the economy, the timing, the politics, but instead I went back to the whiteboard. I didn't mourn, I measured, I asked what went wrong, what could I control, what must I change. That process, that brutal, honest self-examination, that's where power is born. We live in a culture that glorifies winning but hides the wounds. Everyone wants to show their highlight reel but edit out the pain. I don't subscribe to that. I show the cracks in the foundation because that's where the strength lies. I tell the story of the failure, not to romanticize it, but to weaponize it. To turn it into something that serves me, instead of something that shames me. The reason failure breaks most people is because they tied their identity to the outcome. So when the outcome fails, they collapse. But when your identity is tied to growth, not glory, you survive. You evolve, you rise. I don't just tolerate failure. I use it. I feed off it. I turn it into strategy. Every fall makes me more agile. Every rejection makes me more refined. That's the thing, failure doesn't weaken the strong, it reveals them. And in the fire of failure, your real capacity is forged. So if you've failed good, that means you've moved. That means you've tried. That means you've done more than most people ever will. But don't just fail and cry. Fail and collect. Collect data. Collect wisdom. collect experience, then get back up and go again smarter. Because that's how you build, that's how you win, not by dodging the losses, but by digging into them, by extracting everything they came to teach you, and then by using that fuel to burn through every excuse, every doubt, and every delay. You want to go far, fail faster, fail forward, fail better, but never fail the same way twice. And when they ask how you got here, don't talk about luck. Don't talk about blessings. Tell them the truth. You got here by turning your setbacks into stepping stones. You built your name from the ashes of your rejection. You took the very thing that was meant to break you and used it to build your crown. When I turned my first $2 into a career, it wasn't magic. It was mindset. It was discipline. It was ownership. Today, that $2 moment is not in my pocket. It's in my identity. I'm no longer the person with $2. I'm someone who turned $2 into a legacy.